Good morning, Ethan.
Good morning, Jonathan.
I noticed that when I was teaching Vectorworks and then I went on to teach Archicad, there were certain similarities between the concepts of CAD and BIM. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, yeah, because we can transfer all the skills from one software to another. The basic is there, and we just need to make use of it.
Initially, when you start teaching, for example, when you go from teaching AutoCAD to teaching Archicad, it doesn't seem like there is a connection between the concepts until you start looking in detail and you start saying, okay, well, AutoCAD has a concept called layers. What are they used for? And layers are used to separate visibility of objects. So you can make some objects visible and some not. But then you go to Archicad and you go, okay, Archicad is something called layers. What are they used for? And you're like, oh, well, they're used to control visibility of objects as well. Oh, so I can take my concept that I've learned from AutoCAD and take that into Archicad and understand the relationship between visibility of objects.
Yeah,
Sorry, go on.
yeah, you can. What about Revit?
Revit looks like it's got something called categories and subcategories, which I've not used. I think you haven't you?
I use Revit, yeah, because Revit has, what should I say, elements, right? So we can do, there are some elements, and we just switch on and off the elements and families and that kind of things. So that's what I usually do instead of layers. But also when we prepared for printing, we can all, it's cool because Revit and AutoCAD are the same, done by the same
Oh,
company. Yeah. Same company like
well,
AutoCAD.
they're owned by the same company, but their history is dramatically different
Yeah. Yeah.
because Revit, I think, was a separate company before being bought by Autodesk.
Yes.
And
True.
so there are some things that have completely different concepts. So they don't talk about model space and paper space. One of the things when I was trying to learn AutoCAD that I found very enjoyable was that I knew how to use layers and I knew how to use model space. And then I found that AutoCAD uses the same concept to create drawings that Archicad and Vectorworks does. That is, that you create your models in model space, you create viewports, and you put them onto layouts or paper space. And that concept of the viewport is interchangeable between lots of CAD programs. But I think I got a feeling that Revit's slightly different, that you actually work in a viewport.
Yeah. And you need to control we have, after that, you go back to a table to control what kind of layer you want to switch it on, what kind of categories you want to switch it on. So that's the same, but different. I think I should say that. So,
So I asked AI to look at this for me. As we've discussed previously, you can use it for helping out with your technical research. And it came out with a couple of different tables for me. They're on my blogger post if anyone wants to have a look. They're great tables to give you that explanation between Archicad, Chief Architect, Revit, Vectorworks, and AutoCAD. But also, it gives you an explanation of what the focus of that concept is. For example, layers, the focus is the core separation of elements,
mhm.
architectural, structural, MEP, annotation, etc. The core focus of elements is the grouping and controlling display attributes. So Archicad has elements, objects like walls, slabs, and stuff. Chief Architect has objects. Vectorworks has design layers, it says here. I might have to go back and edit some of this to just to check it because I don't agree with some of the things that maybe it said. But I'll go back and I'll edit that just to make sure it's completely correct, to my knowledge anyway. But I think it's a great table for anyone learning. So I
Yeah,
guess one of the takeaways from this is that your first CAD/BIM program is the hardest to learn.
true. It takes time. Yeah, the first one.
But then you can transfer the skills that you learn in Archicad and you transfer those to Revit and you transfer those to Chief Architect or you transfer those to another one.
And still get confused all the time. But
Yeah. So let's go back to our students. So the students sometimes get concerned that say in Palmerston North, they only teach Revit and they teach Revit for 2 years and they learn Revit very well over 2 years. In Taradale, in Napier, they teach Archicad year 1 and Revit year 2. So the student never really develops a full understanding of either program, but they can certainly use them and they're certainly useful at the end of each year.
yeah,
So they have a whole year of learning Archicad. some of my students end up working for a company that uses chief architect. So they have to transfer those skills. My belief is that by teaching them two programs and learning to jump between one program and another, you've given them a head start on going to that third program, chief architect. And what
Right.
you really need is a translation diary or a translation document. Oh, we use layers in Archicad. Oh, we use layers in chief architect. Oh, we use elements in Archicad. We use objects in chief architect. We use layer combinations in Archicad. We use layer sets in chief architect. So actually the transfer of skill from one to the other is really easy because you've
Mhm.
got lots of concepts that you can build on to learn how to do that.
Yeah, I think a few even earlier sessions, we talk about changing transferable skills from each one software to the other. And also there are change new programs rise and go away in our career, starting from, and also we started learning from the pencil drawings and then AutoCAD and then Revit or other software like Vectorworks and etc. And yeah, obviously not just the layers which are on the concept, also the drawing concept is definitely because the ultimate goal is we are creating architectural drawings, and during AutoCAD we although AutoCAD allow us to draw 3D, but usually we draw in 2D drawings and 3D. If we produce 3D drawings, we can't print it out properly in architectural standards. We can't print it out in architectural standard on the drawings. Our AutoCAD is usually 2D. We use it, and then we would transfer to other BIM software in early 2000s or 2010s. And the skills are definitely transferable, and but the concept behind it of how to control the layers and the viewports and etc. That's slightly different, but it's not that complicated to my view. And Jonathan, I know that you use Revit, Vectorworks, and Archicad, and you've been juggling around. And how did you keep it and all the time on top of the game?
I used to use a program so my first CAD program was called Acropolis. It was
Mhm,
actually written in-house at
mhm,
the company that I worked, BDP, Building Design Partnership. So there was no one else ever in the world who was going to use this program because the in-house programmer wrote it. But at some point we transitioned to MicroStation, and MicroStation had a special concept in the way that it created drawings and stuff. And that was a learning curve for everybody. Then I learned Vectorworks in my own time. And so there was one period where I was working for two companies. I was working for the Royal Sadler's Wells Theatre. I was working for the project manager, and I was looking after his MicroStation drawings 2 days a week. And then 3 days a week, I was working for an interior design company called Din Associates in Vauxhall in South London. And the first hour was always really tricky because MicroStation had the ability to create little scripts you could run. And it also used all the function keys on the keyboard, which was really cool. So you could hit function key one, it would pop up a menu, and I could hit function key two and it would do stuff. And I had all these function keys and all this programming set up in it, which was really cool. But the first hour I spent on Vectorworks, I'd be hitting my function keys and nothing would happen because Vectorworks doesn't have that. And so it would be really tricky. And took me about an hour, I think, to get used to Vectorworks and the different interface and the way you draw. And then Monday would come around and I'd go to a MicroStation and my keyboard shortcuts wouldn't work because I was used to using Vectorworks again. And so it would always take a little while to learn those different things. But if you think about it, many of us use InDesign, Photoshop, email, and other programs. We don't struggle to jump between our CAD program and our email. We know that those are two different things, and we don't expect the keyboard shortcuts to be the same. And so the way is really just to compartmentalize like you would other software. It's more convenient if your keyboard shortcuts work across all your different programs. But if you use two different video editing programs, you don't expect one to exactly look like the other or work exactly the same as the other. You actually learn that one uses one way. And I see CAD as similar to those video editing programs. The basic concept behind video editing is the same regardless of what video editing program you use. You got the main reel, you got the B reel, which is the secondary information. And so you learn that those two programs work differently in the same way that you actually learn that CAD programs work differently. And I
Hmm.
think that if you learn to use them well, you can actually jump from one to another. I know that I could when I was younger, but I could certainly jump between. And I do teach Archicad still, and I teach Vectorworks, and I can jump from one to the other. And I remember what each one does. I just don't treat them as being the same. They might be working in an architectural area, but they are using different tools, techniques. You can't expect to take something from Vectorworks and use it directly in Archicad. But there are core concepts that we can look at. So, for example, if we look at Chief, Archicad, Vectorworks, Revit, those are BIM programs, building information modeling programs. That once you learn the core principles of building information modeling, then you can apply those principles to every one of those programs. The idea is that it's a three-dimensional object with data attached, what presents in 2D or 3D using various techniques, and you learn that those are the way they work. Dimensioning works very similar in lots of programs, like
Yeah.
slightly tricky in these very subtle differences. But basically, you click, this is where I want to start my dimension, this is where I end my dimension, this is where I want to put it. So there's a lots of that transfer of skill from one to the other. But the real core, the one thing that shouldn't change is how we think about creating a set of documents. What are plans for? What are details for? What are elevations for? What are sections for? And so those things totally transferable from one to another. And you can also transfer them back to a drawing board because those things are core architectural presentation. Things like spatial reasoning and visualization, the ability to mentally manipulate 3D space or interpret 2D plans, these are greatly transferable between the different programs. Now, the documentation workflow might be slightly different. That
Hmm.
is, we model, we then create viewports, we then put them on paper space or layout areas, and then we print. That's actually quite similar, like the names are different. And
Yeah.
I find when I'm teaching the students, quite often there's too much information for them to grasp all at once. They're thinking about their assignments due tomorrow, and you're trying to teach them to create layouts. They're not really thinking about layouts, they're thinking about something else. And so there's that challenge for them because there's so much to learn in such a short time. But it doesn't stop the idea that the workflow is similar between all of these programs. You model, you create viewports, you output.
Okay. When you talk about the workflow, and I just had one thing in my mind because we did it like a VDC, which we are talking in New Zealand, virtual design and construction. So we designed and constructions part. Nowadays, these companies like Vectorworks, AutoCAD, they promote to use in the construction. They promote to use augmented reality in at the site to check whether the let's say the pipes drain pipe is there, etc. You put goggles and augmented reality, and yeah, the it's not just the paper space and model space, it's also how you want to present in the how do you want to make use of that software. It's like a more getting more and more advanced. I think starting from paper now, it's like they want to present in 3D. The software makers are trying to go into that way. That's what I think. But not every that feature has been in these software for more than a decade or a decade and a half. And but not everybody is make use of it. One thing is that technology is quite expensive, and also those goggles and those things are also quite expensive. I know in New Zealand there are people using iPad to read the drawings and going to the site and check whether the pipes and all the columns beams are there, the connections are there. Yeah. But it's also a lot of work for the drafting teams. I think so. Yeah. And also how you want to organize, like you're not organizing like a 3D, 2D printings, you're giving out the 3D model, but and also the guy who working at the site or supervise, at least supervisor and foreman, he needs to know how to use that BIM software. So yeah, I think it's that's another game. I think so. We are talking about the same thing. So same software, Yeah, but since we are AutoCAD, we draw 2D. Now we are doing 3D, and we put information, so people are trying to make use of it. So that's the directions there. Yeah, for the end products, and yeah, what do you
Well,
want?
I know it sounds fantastic that we can
Mhm.
have a augmented reality and we can look around. And they always use a big example. Oh,
Yes,
we're going to check to make sure that the ducts don't clash with the beams. But where do you draw the line with augmented reality? Because each pipe that you put in, each beam that you put in requires a draftsman or somebody. Maybe it'll be AI in the future, but it requires something to put that information in, somebody or something to put all that information in. Now, no one ever talks about augmented reality in checking the reinforcing. We always talk about augmented reality in checking the big things, the beams and the clashes and the beams. So, how do we deal with those other small things? The other thing, like I was thinking, no one checks, no one talks about augmented reality as checking the bolt holes on all of the beam connections, because we draw those in plan view or the reinforcing's a good one. We describe it with words. We don't actually draw each piece of reinforcing. Do we have augmented reality where we can look at the reinforcing before we pour the concrete and check to make sure that every bar is in exactly the right place? Because
I'm
that's
not
not the
so
way.
sure. I'm not so sure, but I know that Tekla, the software called Tekla, can do it. But no, I never use it because Tekla has been promoting for the reinforcing and the structural connections. I don't know how people use it, so I have no idea.
What if you start your reinforcing an inch in the wrong place? Do you get a notification that you're in the wrong place? Does it make a difference if your reinforcing's out by 20 millimeters or an inch, one way or the other? Because my understanding is that it wouldn't make that much difference. Now,
Or what will
if you were missing one bar, maybe it wouldn't make a difference. If you're missing a half a dozen, then sure, it's going to make a difference. So now, if you're going to get the software to do that, are we going to get 3D modeling software to automatically create all of our reinforcing? Then who's going to check it? Does somebody check it, or do we just accept that it's absolutely fine? Now, the other problem I've got with the augmented reality is how does a contractor price an augmented reality 3D model? Does the contractor actually look in that model in 3D, or does the contractor go to the schedule of quantities and say, I'm going to price this building on the schedule of quantities? There are so many tons of steel. There are so many tons of concrete or cubic meters of concrete. There are so many linear meters of 4x2 or 90 by 45. And then they count up, then they order it in, they count it up, and you get a bill based on what they actually used.
Yeah. In 2024, I attended a CPD from NZIQS, and there is a guy, there's a QS, he knows how to extract out the quantity from BIM model. So that means there are some QS who knows how to use BIM and extract out the quantity, and he teach the QS how to use it. So that's positive news. But it also mean I know that there are so many QS or estimator who have no idea of how to extract out the quantity as well. That's another area for discussion, I think.
Yeah, but there's my point that we're not
Mhm,
actually using the model to price. We're
mhm.
taking the model and extracting the quantities from the model, which we can do right now. We can do that in these CAD programs. Archicad can do it. I'm sure Revit can do it. I know Vectorworks can do it. You can actually say, give me the quantities of all of the cladding.
Yeah.
So many square meters of cladding. Great, I can price that. But is the contractor going to look at the 3D model, or are they going to want that information extracted? Because I believe that they need that information extracted to price it.
Yeah. Also, for example, like we call it Cos X has ANZ adds on there. So, well, I'm not expert in doing that, so I have no idea. Maybe I need to ask my friends how they do it with BIMs and Cos X together. So yeah, I never tried before. I only know how to extract out the quantity, but they must know as per Cos X or ANZ SMM's requirement.
I see we've gone off topic again,
Yeah,
as we often do. So let's bring it back to the topic. So the couple of things that are to me, the big takeaways from this interchange of information is that it doesn't stop us having to think about our spatial reasoning, our visualization, our detailing. All of that still has to be thought of regardless of what program you're using. The documentation workflow is still the same. We
Yep.
can transfer those skills about documentation workflow and we can swap names. So it's easy for us to translate between layers, layers in Archicad, layers in AutoCAD, classes in Vectorworks, layers in Chief Architect. We should be able to swap that easily to make those changes. Objects, elements, these things that you just transfer. You're drawing a wall, you're drawing a wall. All of these BIM programs use this concept of wall, mainly because of the interchange of information. So we use IFC. There's a standard for what a wall is. So we know that a wall is like this. And the other thing that we talked about a couple of podcasts ago, the understanding the data structure, where we store the information, that's a transferable skill. But there's also understanding the data structure inside the program, inside your model. So recognize the importance of classification, naming conventions, utilizing object data, the properties and attributes for scheduling and reporting. This is a transferable concept. So these are really good things. Now, I've got a summary here, which is that the core concept remains consistent across all platforms. Separate the creation environment, model space, design layers, model, from the documentation environment, paper space, layouts, and sheets. The ability to manage the separation and link dynamic models to static output sheets is critical in the transferable skill. So to me, that's the main thing. Is the question was, are the skills transferable? And the answer is absolutely.
Yeah, true.
So if you're a student and you're learning Archicad, don't worry that it's Archicad. Those skills you can transfer to Revit.
True. Shall we wrap up for today?
Yeah, let's wrap up for today. So it was actually, as we started to think about, it was really straightforward. But I asked AI to answer this question for me. It generated this really wonderful table. If the students want access to it, I'll put the link in the description.
All right. And as always, please can subscribe our Spotify and see you next week.
See you next week, Ethan.